Hello. Wow, such a wondrous glowing lighting. Welcome to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and this is World Watch and the highlight videos, mashup videos. Over the last 6 weeks, I had made weekly videos where I discuss my thoughts watching every single playoff game, yes, including that one, of all 11 participating regions. Those have come and gone, and I'm still working on some other videos at this moment, highlighting each and every team to give a quick introduction. But in the meantime, as I'm still working on that, I thought, not quick, but simpler, I will just put in large videos of the highlights, and I'll be putting a multitude of them, one for all of the playoffs in order of how they appeared, and one for each region in order of how they appeared. If you look at the title, that's the video you're watching. So, without further ado, let's just get to the first one. Starting with, and it's the inaugural North American LCS Summer 2022 playoff. We got Team Liquid versus FlyQuest. And they threw us off a little bit. From game one, I thought this would be a lot more competitive. Both teams showing some solid signs of neutral play, great vision application, some wonky draft choices, but overall very adaptive. But then the series moves on, and Team Liquid just gets better and better as they go. Where I once thought they had some bad habits of slowing down as the game moves on, disappears, especially by the time Game 4 hits, where some of the more shallow vision tendencies becomes a lot deeper and a lot more expansive and complete. Any particular small mistakes, they seem to just build up better and better over time. Circle around the draft choices, though. Both sides opted often to play drafts that would benefit from stronger engage options, but instead opted into more complicated compositions, which inherently fine, but given the inconsistent applications of these drafts, it confused me at times. Team fighting definitely goes the way of Team Liquid, and primarily on how they used vision denial to really gain as many advantages before the fight even begins. And while FlyQuest have some solid individual players and some solid outplay moments, you can tell that there are times where the coordination isn't quite there yet. Shout out to Santorin and Core JJ, who really applied the setups early game that allowed every snowball that Team Liquid themselves could play from and really gain advantages as they picked up things to go. Also, please, for the love of God, stop picking Vayne. There's a service announcement, all right? Unless you think you are that much better than your opponent, stop. It is disrespectful. I'm looking at you, FlyQuest. Let's look at the next series. And we go back to North America's LCS with Cloud9 versus CLG, and all CLG fans can see it now. We kind of expected this to happen. We really did. As a CLG fan, I am not surprised at the result. Hitting the lower bracket, CLG will have to contend with their decision-making and vision issues. Just both hold hand in hand, as without full information, whatever choices you opt for will be incomplete and likely very wrong. Now, they showed signs that they can do it, and with solid coordination and excellent team fighting out of them, I can see CLG taking maybe the 4th seed, but I'm not convinced they'll do it. The same thing goes for Cloud9, actually, who are inconsistent with their decisiveness and ability to coordinate team fights, but they still keep up a lot of proactivity with their excellent Vision control and denial, they can make up a lot of their weaknesses that they hold during team fights as they regularly find picks and number advantages, especially around neutral objectives. I really enjoy I'll really enjoy seeing how Cloud9 pull off these kinds of team fighting scenarios that play with against teams that play with fewer mistakes overall, as that will truly tell me if they're able to pull off getting one of the seeds for Worlds, or if they're going to require to play against a team that makes a lot of mistakes to pull off any of the plays that they have. And it's not like they can't pull off these plays regularly. It just seems like this is a thing that they lean on more than anything else. Now, shout out to Berserker and Sven, who created large advantages in their lanes on their own, and thanks to it, and thanks to a lot of the way that they positioned, helped enable a lot of the way that they played around their vision game that worked so well for that squad. Let's take a look at the next series. Off to North America with the LCS's lower bracket playoff, Team Solo Mid versus FlyQuest, and what a very evenly matched series. These two teams have shown a lot of solid vision play, very awkward neutral approaches, a wide spectrum of teamfight approaches ranging from very awkward to excellent, and some individual outplays that are incredibly executed. These teams were evenly matched on all fronts. The only thing here is that TSM was a lot more consistent in all of these approaches of the game. Now, this begs the question if their ability to face higher seeded teams will match this at all, or if it's even good enough. Just looking back on how Team Liquid fared against FlyQuest, I can see an avenue in which TSM could catch them off guard, but the level in which they would have to play there consistently is just not here in this series. Especially not with some of the more awkward flank approaches and brazen macro choices around neutrals that FlyQuest were able to just answer so easily. But a lot of this still applies to FlyQuest in about the same way. Either of these teams going, it still would have been difficult to say which one would be doing fine more than the other. That said, Team Solomid did find an avenue of flexibility with their drafts, allowing for more variety of options that just didn't exist with FlyQuest. Let's just see if they can bring that to the next stage, whoever their opponent might be from that. Shout out to Maple and Solo, who created the spaces that allowed some of the more awkward approaches that TSM attempted to thrive and work so well. Let's take a look at the next series. And we're off into the lower bracket kerfuffle that this series was from the North American LCS. We got Counterlogic Gaming versus Golden Guardians. And honestly, not expected. Scoreline, mostly not expected. Final result, expected. Because the Golden Guardians pulled off a lot more than expected. Some very good vision play, decent neutral setup, decent coordination during team fights, superb draft sense and how to approach the win conditions from them. But the lack of proactivity during mid to late game really hurt them in the long run, and the very limited styles of draft that they could employ. Their successes mainly came from 6A outperforming during this entire series, and from the way that CLG were opting into some rather poor decision making. Which comes to the big elephant in the room. This should have been a clean 3-0 for Counterlogic Gaming. And yet here we hit silver scrapes and we see the final draft and it's not clear who would come out on top. In fact, looking at the draft, you'd think it was an easy win for Golden Guardians. Easy front to back setup that scales super well and gives a lot of space for 6A to do his magic. On the other side, no engage options, 1-3-1 setup that really requires early leads. But this time we get to see what was expected out of Counterlogic Gaming. High tempo pacing, clever approach to team fighting, solid vision play and side lane options. The goal is ballooning crazily. But the series as a whole shows even more holes in this team regarding their macro choices and target selection. When it's good, it's really good. And yet, this is super inconsistent out of them from this series and the Cloud9 series. And if they don't shape up, I have zero reasons to believe that they'll even qualify for Worlds. Shout out to Dokla and Palafox, who, honestly, when on form, really created the kind of chaos that CLG thrives under and got the leads that they needed. Take a look at the next series. We head off to the LCS's first winners semifinal in the upper bracket. We've got 100 Thieves versus Team Liquid. These series just are hidden one after the other. Really solid stuff. Congrats to the Thieves on being the 9th team, asterisk, to qualify for Worlds. The series looked like it was going to be a sweep in either direction, regular or reverse, and it didn't end up being that. For Team Liquid, who are still in the running, their vision play, side lane management, and overall coordination is excellent. This is equally bolstered by the drafting style they had, which allows them to thrive under very different kinds of win conditions. The Thieves, for their part, didn't show the largest variety of draft styles, but did show a stronger sense of neutral play in team fights, especially the team fight angles. So much so that the games were regularly decided by how they approached those neutral team fights. It is weird to see the team controlling the tempo just not be proactive, and that's what ultimately seemed to be lacking from Team Liquid overall. Moments for sure, mostly during the early game where they'd be proactive, but once the mid to late game came around, it was mostly a waiting game then on, where 100 Thieves would either play into the trap that they would set up or fumble to make their move. The Thieves just look like a team that will, definitely test the merits of the lower seeded teams at Worlds. But because, like I mentioned, their drafting style having been the most, having not the most variety to it, I can see where some of the limitations could come in. And for the most part, from this series, I can see Team Liquid qualifying if they kind of course correct their proactivity. Shout out to Sunday and Closer, who controlled the battlefield of every single team fight in a way that were very hard for Team Liquid to manage. Let's take a look at the next series. And we get to the second semifinals of the winners bracket, or the upper bracket of North America's LCS. We've got Cloud9 versus Evil Geniuses. And congrats on Cloud9 being the 10th team to qualify for Worlds. Now, Evil Geniuses hold a lot of solid fundamentals. Good wave manipulation, side lane controls, decent vision play, some solid coordination, questionable decision making here or there. But the main issue lies in where they choose to be proactive. Their drafts primarily focus on small skirmish and wave manipulations, making neutral fights harder to engage on. Cloud9, for their part, have solid draft sense and neutral play that complements this current meta. And as they were much more proactive in this series, it's no wonder that Evil Geniuses found themselves regularly on the back foot. Now, much more proactive doesn't mean proactive enough. Cloud9 looked more prepared to make active moves mid to late game, as Evil Geniuses held a lot of ground early game, and preference for when the proactivity would happen on either team didn't matter when Cloud9 were doing more to get their win conditions unlocked and ready to go. I do think that it's notable that Cloud9, despite their proactivity issues, still had enough going for them to deal with this particular matchup. Evil Geniuses going into the lower bracket and seeing the other three teams there in TSM, Counterlogic Gaming, and Team Liquid, I'm really unsure who comes out on top as the third and last seed of the LCS for the Worlds. But I'm not confident it'll be Evil Genius, given how much more proactive the other three teams are and how they prioritize to get their leads. It really will depend on if Evil Geniuses pivots and adapts towards this current meta properly. Shout out to Jensen and Berserker, who were huge in each skirmish and fight. All eyes were on them. Let's take a look at the next series. And we're into the semifinal losers of the North American LCS. We've got Team Liquid versus Counterlogic Gaming. To be a CLG fan is never a good time. Now, as a CLG fan, there is nothing more poetic than getting your hopes up and then being disappointed completely. Now, that said, the series was super interesting on how both teams play out their series respectively. Because on paper, both have solid vision and early game application, really excellent at playing out leads, while struggling a little bit to answer while behind, solid coordinated team fights while ahead, while being a little disjointed when behind. Both teams excel at early game approach and only work as a team if they are ahead, otherwise most of their games just kind of fall apart. What's really fascinating to me watching this series and watching all of the other ones these two teams have played is that this isn't a game-to-game aspect, because either team moving on for me would have been fine from a game-to-game aspect. Yes, even with my CLG bias, even if Team Liquid lost and CLG went so on the direction, I'm pretty okay with Team Liquid moving on. But as a series as a whole, how is it that Counterlogic Gaming are really strong right out the gate, but lose steam as more games pass, and Team Liquid take 1 to 2 games to get going before really finding their stride? Honestly, I prefer CLG's situation, but not by much, as it leads to this being the third reverse sweep of the summer playoffs. Now, as Team Liquid moves on, and I'm looking at Evil Geniuses and Team Solo Mid, and I'm not a big fan of who the prospective third team is for the LCS. Team Liquid look like the strongest contenders, depending on how the other series shows, but they need to show strong play right out the gate in their series, or it doesn't look like they'll be having a good time at Worlds. Now, shout out to Santorin and Bjergsen, who do a lot of work to get the team in a solid position for any of the given team fights. Let's take a look at the next series. All right. We're back to North America with the lower bracket, where we've got Evil Geniuses versus Team Solo Mid. And I hate saying this, but as a fairly big TSM hater, I still preferred the way that they approached the game, especially over Evil Geniuses. Now, that said, Team Solo Mid were still inconsistent with the approach. They had stronger vision, side lane controlled, stronger neutral approach, and excellent drafting, but that doesn't matter in situations where they only work when ahead in golden tempo. When Team Solo Mid play ahead, it spoils and riches, but when behind, they're caught in a drought of doing nothing at all. Evil Geniuses, for their part, were significantly more proactive on the plays, but the vision is usually shallow, and their drafts force them into significantly harder to play scenarios than needed. Team Solo Mid looked like they did their homework, while Evil Geniuses play like they just so happened to own the answer card to the test, and yet still doesn't follow the answers. Evil Geniuses regularly drafted compositions with win conditions that they just wouldn't lean into. And just so you know, that's a lot of 1-3-1 drafts just to ignore the side lanes completely and just really attack the mid lane just as an ARAM. Why draft side lane control if you're not going to use them to control the side lanes? From what I see here, I'm not particularly a fan of the possible third team the LCS is going to be sending for Worlds. Between Evil Geniuses' drafting choices and how they avoid playing them properly, and Team Liquid needing to warm up 2 games in their series, it's not looking super good for the third seed of the LCS. Shout out to Inspired and Impact, who held a lot of control and sway in the top half of the map and the jungle. Take a look at the next series. We're off in North America's LCS's upper bracket semifinals. We've got Cloud9 versus 100 Thieves. And Cloud9 show us that patience can be a strong tool against a team that make quick, unflinchingly bad decisions. In this situation, the Thieves usually show, or usually have at least stronger vision play, neutral setup, team fight coordination, not by a whole lot, not by much, but it's there. That advantage for them is there. What Cloud9 does, or at least what they excel in, is the macro decision making. So often, 100 Thieves would have either like a stronger control of the map, better draft, gold lead, and a Drake lead, and then make a bafflingly bad decision that just leaves them in a lose-lose scenario. Meanwhile, Cloud9 will find any minute disadvantage to keep trading up, and once they have a significant lead, they do so much work to suffocate the Thieves. And Cloud9 will avoid taking straight up fights against them because they know that they're not the stronger team for it. They instead just stack any given particular favor, like any particular situation in their favor, like no tomorrow. Cloud9 are a fascinating team to watch from series to series. Seeing how they adapt themselves to their opponents, I just worry a little bit that they don't hold enough proactivity, as much of their play was still on the back of how 100 Thieves played in the same way that all of their other games were. Now that said, the Thieves have such a simple course correction for themselves. And just to be a fantastic team, it's really down to either fixing their macro decisions and or drafting choices so that they can take something that fits within their style. With that, I could see the Thieves coming back to the finals and win a potential rematch against Cloud9. Shout out to Jensen and Blabber, who created so many small advantages that led to the stacked team fights in their favor. Take a look at the next series. It's it's like the quarterfinals in the lower bracket of North America's LCS, where we've got Evil Geniuses versus Team Liquid. Not so great choices for North America. I'm sorry, North America, this year you don't seem to have great prospects. Anywho, congratulations to Evil Geniuses on being the 23rd team to qualify for Worlds. Honestly, the look of both of these teams did not inspire much confidence for the region. Team Liquid are the more consistent of the two teams, especially in regards to vision, drafting, and side lane pressure. But whenever something needed to be a guarantee, Team Liquid falter, or too slow, or wait for the Geniuses to make a mistake instead of being proactive. Similarly, for Evil Geniuses, who are inconsistent as to when they want to be proactive and apply pressure, but are at least more consistent in regards to how they do team fighting and neutral objective setup. To me, the edge will always go to the team who plans and drafts with proactivity in mind. And while Team Liquid is a little safe for my liking, Evil Geniuses would still regularly overstep and overestimate the leads that they had, allowing Team Liquid to punish quickly and regain so much of what they would have lost based on their very defensive play. I like at least that it didn't take 2 games for Team Liquid to get going, but they still had issues with how they approached the late game. And Evil Geniuses don't require games to warm up in a series, so even if the series did go to 5 games, which it did, Team Liquid was on match point before Evil Geniuses, I do think that Evil Geniuses is still the better choice for NA, but from 2 choices that are rather rough, it's only slightly better at best. I do think that they'll do great against a lot of the lower-seeded teams going into Worlds, keeping them really on their toes, but the competition at Worlds is really rough this year, as in, like, they're really competitive, like, they're really strong this year, from at least what I've seen from the other 22 teams that have qualified. Shout out to Inspired and Jojo Pune, who really kept their counterparts under control and unable to perform. Let's take a look at the next series. It's the North American LCS's semifinals. We got 100 Thieves versus Evil Geniuses. And right off the bat, all right, shout out to Kaori who stepped in for some from some big shoes on Evil Geniuses and came up super big. Excellent shit. That said, the Thieves really came in with a host of strategies that worked on different levels and were incredibly flexible all around. Both teams are inconsistent in terms of vision and side lane play, but are incredibly solid in terms of team fights and neutral setups. This is a fairly even matchup, which is a shame because these teams draft for side lane setups so often, and it rarely becomes relevant until Baron or Soul has been secured, and that they're so far up in golden tempo at this point that side lane pressure is really easy. And speaking of tempo, right? The pace of all of these 5 games was not dedicated by any of the teams, but by the timers of the neutral objectives, nothing else. None of these teams controlled the tempo of the game, which to me is concerning given how many teams around the world, or at least going to Worlds, have strong tempo control. There's a larger emphasis on upkeeping map pressure, and as good as that is, if all you're doing is allowing your opponent to keep up parity without ballooning gold outside of these neutral team fights, you'll be in for a rough time against some of these teams who don't quit while behind. I can appreciate the measured response that both teams have, though, during these team fights especially, really skirting around the limits as much as possible, which is something a lot of the other teams going into Worlds have trouble dealing with. Overall, either team winning in this series would have done the trick for me. Given the context of the North American scene, they're pretty solid, and Evil Geniuses going into play-ins feel like a formality more than anything else, and they are likely, keyword likely, to make it out of play-ins if they clean things up just a little bit. But there's a lot of good teams in play-ins. Shout out to Closer and Abadage, who control the tempo and space of every fight excellently. These were really solid team fights in this series. Let's take a look at the next series. It's the final series of the summer playoffs. In North America's LCS's, we got the grand final, which is also a rematch. Cloud9 versus 100 Thieves. And holy moly, was this really one-sided. The evolution of Cloud9 is something to behold and incredibly interesting. Momentum is super important going into Worlds, and that is a huge boost to do so, right? While both sides have solid vision play and early neutral approaches, the thing that really kicks it off is the proactivity that Cloud9 has looking for any opening, whether they are ahead or not. The Thieves regularly played drafts that made things difficult for them and wouldn't always play to their win conditions, but it didn't really stop their early games from being excellent regardless if they played for it or not. Once behind, though, it was clear that their drafts would still become an issue if they were not playing to their win conditions just altogether. Cloud9 have a lot to prove from this series. They look like the strongest team from the region, sure, but they also look like the most consistent from the region and with a proper approach to the game. I don't have much confidence that the Evil Geniuses or 100 Thieves will show strong competitive edge against the other teams from the legacy regions. But Cloud9 have the hallmarks to make it out of groups. Not confidently, but, if they continue to play with the limits that they use in team fights, the strong pressure established around neutrals, and the consistent proactive look for anything, that will move the game ahead because that's just it. Using the proactive play is that Cloud9 is the only team in the LCS that didn't just let the game go into a lull from the mid-game to the late game, making sure their leads meant something and to avoid relying on neutral timers while still holding strong control of them. We'll see who they end up being drawn with and if they can make a splash at groups, but otherwise, I may not have strong confidence they'll come out of groups, but they're the most likely team, I find. Shout out to Berserker and Jensen, who together created so much chaos and control for the team fights that 100 Thieves struggled to maneuver. And this is the final series of the summer playoffs. Now we just have to wait for Worlds. Take a look at my YouTube channel. And for those who are already watching the YouTube video, stick around. damn, that was a journey. That's 94 playoffs, or depending on the region that you were watching, anywhere between 5 to 15 best of fives. If you want to watch from the other regions, or you really want to watch the supercut, on either side, I don't remember which side I'm going to put it on, you can just watch those there. I want to hear your thoughts also on like which one of these were your favorite, what teams you think you're going to be like rooting for, just anything and everything down below. I'll be again making some videos further down the line, or should have some videos produced further down the line with all of the magic that comes with it. So keep your eyes peeled. And with that, I'll see you all next time for when I do the introductions of all the different teams. Ciao. Thank you all for watching.